Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Mike Petrilli. I am the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and I am super excited to be moderating this panel today, talk about the final report of the National Working Group on Advanced Education, and to share with you the recommendations of that report, along with a fantastic panel, 3 of the members of that working group who are with us today and who each know much more about this field of advanced learning than I do. We're going to get to tap their expertise to understand how we can build a wider, more diverse pipeline of advanced learners. It is the view of this working group that we are not doing a good enough job in this country building that kind of pipeline, that there are a lot of kids out there in America today who are high achieving or have the potential for high achievement that are not getting the advanced learning opportunities that they need in order to fulfill their potential. We know we are doing this webinar at a time when there is a lot of bad news in the field of education. Frankly, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, latest test scores just came out and they are devastating. Decades of progress wiped out by the pandemic. And we know that the lowest achieving students have been hit particularly hard. But the high achieving students are not doing well either. And they too made a big nosedive on this latest NAEP report. We are not doing well enough by any of our students. Today, we are going to focus on those high achievers, or the kids with the potential for high achievement. And we're going to find out what are some very specific concrete strategies that school districts and charter schools and states can put in place to better serve these kids. And to make sure that the students who maybe come into school with a lot of potential, that they live up to that potential academically. So all the way on the other end, you know, when they graduate high school, they're ready to go on, do advanced level work in college and beyond. You know, this panel is also happening at a time when we are all waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court in 2 cases having to do with affirmative action in higher education. I think the working group is certainly not of one mind about how we're hoping that case goes, and we're all going to have to just see what the court says, what is now going to be legal and not legal. But certainly, we, I think, would agree that if we did a much better job as a country developing the academic potential of high achievers, including students from marginalized groups, African Americans and Hispanic students, students from low-income communities, and others, we could do a much better job having a diverse higher education system as well. So a lot here to cover, and a lot, this is one of these super important issues. So with that, let's get into the conversation, and let me introduce you to our panel. Now, let me see if I can figure out how to move there we go. Okay, excellent. So joining us today, we have Sneha Shah-Coltrane, Director of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education at the North Carolina Department of Education, Homero Chavez, Director of the College, I'm sorry, I can't see it because of my screen, the Early College Program at Gadsden Elementary School District 32, and Scott Peters, Senior Research Scientist at NWEA. These little blurbs aren't nearly enough. So let's just spend a little bit of time getting to know our panelists. Sneha, let's start with you, if you don't mind, and introduce yourself. Just tell us a bit about how you got involved in this world of advanced learning and what you do for the state of North Carolina.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I first just want to say thank you so much to the Fordham Institute for bringing this national work group together. It really was a highlight of my career, being able to sit at a table and really discuss these issues with experts from all sorts of backgrounds. And so thank you, Fordham, and thank you, Michael, for this opportunity. So I am Sneha from North Carolina. And so I'm here at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I oversee an area that encompasses all of the advanced learning programs here in North Carolina, all the way from early admittance to kindergarten, through governor school and dual enrollment and high school programming, as well as AIG programming. And how I got into this work, which what we're talking about today has really been my life's passion, has been from the regular classroom lens, we're looking at how do we ensure every student is seen at potential and really responded to their needs. And that with children coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, how do we do that, but yet really ensure we are moving children at the pace and the rigor that they deserve. So it's been a lifelong passion, so thank you
Great.
Michael, for having me here.
Fantastic. Okay, Scott, your turn. What brings you to this world of advanced learning?
Yeah, it's interesting for me because I really got into it not because of the the advanced learners specifically, but because of this idea of instructional match, and that really good and effective learning is when students are exposed to content that is new for them, that is challenging for them, but not too challenging. So kind of that happy medium, that Goldilocks zone or zone of proximal development. And really early on in my career, I started to really notice that the students who are kind of most, I think, out of whack, I suppose is the technical term, were really those advanced learners, those students who were being exposed to content that really they had mastered 2 or 3 years ago. And the concept to me of just how kind of inefficient and ineffective that is. And somebody once used the analogy of, how much more do you learn from the airline safety presentation each time? You hear the same content over and over and over. And at some point, not only are you not learning new things, but at some point you just kind of get frustrated by it. You start to check out. And I worry a lot about that with advanced learners, is that not only are they not showing gains and growing and learning new things, but actually the thing that kind of worries me the most is that you've got, a student out there, I've got a second grade daughter, and she really likes math. And I worry that over how many years of not being challenged in math before she stops liking math. Now she's doing fine, but those are the kids that I worry about out there that have a real love of learning, but at some point they're just going to stop loving it because they're getting frustrated or bored. So that's what kind of brings me to the work.
Great, thank you. And Homero, tell us about what brings you here.
Well, back in 2008, I felt that we needed to include, advanced learners and help these kids to gain much more vision in STEM-related degrees. I felt that the district wasn't really paying attention to the advanced learners, so we set up a plan back in 2008 to make sure that we could change that perspective. And we've done pretty well with our community, and that's what got me started. The fact that in nationally, Hispanics are they're not there's not enough kids that are in STEM fields. So basically, that's I said we need to do something to be able to have more kids get involved with engineering and math and medical degrees. So that's what got me started with the whole deal of advanced learning. By seeing that the district wasn't really paying attention to the kids, that they were only paying attention, focusing on the kids that were in the low end, which is okay, but they were ignoring the high level kids, and we wanted to do something with that, and 18 years later, we've done pretty good with the tools we really have.
Great, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more, but really an amazing story about what you've built there in Gadsden, and a border town in Arizona, sending lots of kids to the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth, and lots of middle schoolers into dual enrollment at the higher education level. Incredible work, and showing really what's possible. All right, I should say to those of you out there listening and tuning in, we are going to be taking questions today, so you can put those in the Q&A if you can. Please not the chat, because I might not see those, but in the Q&A, and I'll figure out a good time to bring those questions into our panel. Okay. All right. Now, let me just tell you the mission of this working group that convened over the last year. And it was to promote policies and practices to develop the full capacities of students with high academic potential, especially Black and Hispanic students, those coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. So that's the theme that we're going to keep coming back to today. Okay, we care about all kids with high academic potential, okay, but particularly those students who have been, we think, underserved by this field. You're also going to notice that we are mostly trying to use language around advanced learners, advanced learning opportunities. We are not talking so much about gifted and talented education. Now, we will probably fall back on that term a few times, but it is the view of the working group, and we say this in the report, that we think it's time to turn the page on that language, that the gifted language comes with a lot of baggage. And also just at the mission of our group, we're really focusing on academic high achievers. Certainly know that there are, in the field of gifted education, a focus also on kids who are gifted in music or in the arts or in other domains. But here we're focused really on the core academic subjects and how to make sure that we help those high achievers or kids with the potential for high achievement live up to that potential. Make sense? All right, so let's get into what this final report calls for. 36 recommendations. We're not going to go one by one, but we will try to get into some of the big ideas. Oh, and here's a list of these fantastic members of the working group: academics, practitioners, policymakers, advocates, some parents. It was really a fantastic group. And I should say, and this is more than an aside, at this moment in America, when we still have so much political polarization, this group really does represent left, right, and center. And it was a beautiful experience for me, I'll say, I think for all of us, to come together, listen to one another, find common ground on an issue that's had a lot of controversy and has certainly in some places been sucked into the culture war, and be able to come out with, I think, some very clear recommendations that we all support. So it is possible. It helps when we can be together in person and listen to each other, understand where we're coming from. So that was very encouraging. All right, so at the beginning of the report, we talk about these 3 overriding principles. And
I lost sound. Can anybody or other people hearing Michael?
Nope, I lost you too, Michael.
Okay. Now, we do know across the eastern seaboard, there are many storms happening today. I know we have been in rain for the last several days, but oh, there we go.
okay, is that better?
You're back. Yep.
I'm back. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. How long ago did you lose me? Well,
Not long at all.
Not long.
20
Okay.
seconds.
All right. So this first principle of the report is to build a continuum of services, right? Rather than say to a student, either you're gifted or you're not gifted. So Sneha, tell us about that. Why is that important?
Sure. Well, I think we have to begin that conversation with this mindset, right? That you just talked about, Michael, this idea that, oh, I get a label and I get to go away for 30 minutes a week. And that is what's going to be great for my kid, for the student. And I think getting away from that mindset is critical when we think about building this continuum of services. We really want to get away from that one size fits all model and to do the best we can to be responsive to student needs, right? Ensuring there's a match between what we're seeing this child needs and the service. Ensuring that there's enough quality instructional experience so that the dosage is high enough so we are making a difference. As we say here in North Carolina, you're AIG all day, every day, right? Well, you're talented, advanced all day, every day. And how are we working together to do that, to ensure that whenever these students are accessing what they need, it's done in a culturally responsive way and a respectful way, and also attending to their needs, right? So it's just like a regular classroom. You don't want somebody to come in and just teach without any differentiation in the regular classroom. Same thing when we're thinking about advanced learning opportunities. How are we building that long-term continuum of services over many years, over even the school day, and ensuring that we are doing that effectively?
Okay, excellent. Appreciate that, Sneha. And we'll get into some more specifics in this as well. It's tricky though, of course, because we still as policy ask schools to tell us how many students do you have in your gifted and talented programs, and who are they, and what's their race and gender. The Office for Civil Rights asks that, and it's an important issue so that we can know about equity, but it reinforces this notion that either you're in or you're out, rather than, hey, maybe you're advanced in math, but not in reading, or, so on
And so
and so
some
forth.
ways, Michael, if I can just add, in a lot of states, in a lot of schools, we are moving towards more specific identification criteria, like reading. Your gift, you need something different in reading and in math, so we can focus that service. And with the idea that, but it's not just that 30 minutes a week, right? Making sure it is comprehensive on a continuum, so we can really have meaningful experiences for children.
Okay, great. Homero, this question about inclusion and the scarcity mindset, again, back to policy, there have been some places over the years that have said, well, we just want you to identify the top 3% of students in your school system for these kinds of services. They've got to hit that target on a nationally normed reference test. The working group really tries to say, hey, we want to try to bring in many more kids and be much more inclusive than that. We don't need to pretend that there's scarcity. That doesn't mean that these advanced learning opportunities are for everyone, but they don't need to be for only 3% of people, right? Tell us a little bit more about that in your experience.
I think that's what's wrong with the system. The system tries to identify only the 3%ers and leaves behind, on the normal curve, 90 to 97%. If you're not in the 98% or above, you're not a gifted student. What's wrong with that? There's a lot of wrong with that. And one of the things, the recommendations, and Jonathan Plucker and Scott Peters talk about it every time in reducing excellence gaps, and also with adopting universal screening. Since 2007, I've been doing that. I don't identify kids with the traditional way of identifying kids with two instruments, like in Arizona, the Glieri test and the kayak test. What I do is I go and do local norms. I universally screen 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and you get more bang for your buck. You get more people engaged in advanced learning. We have here in my program, we have, it's a district that is 5,000, it's a K through 8 system. We have 5,000 kids. We have about 3,000 kids from 5th through 8th. And we're doing really good because we are using local norms. We don't use gifted the exams. We use we look at the numbers, state and local test scores. And from there, we select the high proficiency kids, and that's a good way to embrace, inclusion and widen the pipeline. I think that you end up with more kids. And then the question is, what is it that you want to do with these kids? Identifying these kids is just identifying, but what programs are you going to have for these kids? And again, the report talks about front-loading programs. So what we've done, we have 5th graders that take the ACT. The 12th graders need to take in order to go on to universities and stuff like that. And then we have, starting in 5th and 6th grade, we have kids that take college algebra. Not only it's good to identify the kids, but also to lay the foundation, those academic platforms, so that the kids are able to meet, you can meet the needs of the kids. So, we need to, like the title of the report says, building a wider, more diverse pipeline of advanced learners alludes to the fact that the pipeline is too narrow, and that we need to expand that pipeline. The other thing is the word diverse. Only very few Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans can get through that pipeline. We need to expand it. We need to build a wider, pipeline. And the word building, that's where all these recommendations that we do have in this report will help, schools around America to expand and be more inclusive of advanced learners.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, good. All right, and Scott, this last principle here, that we've really got to think school-wide, right? This is not just the job for, if you have a gifted and talented coordinator, that person, right? Or the classroom teacher. Tell us about this.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of districts, I guess the best way to put it is kind of try to hire their way out of the problem of under-challenged kids. And, many in gifted, I would think that's great. Like, I'll take all the staff I can get, which is fair. Nobody's going to turn down more staff. But the problem is that, if this population of kids, these kids that could do more, that are currently under challenged, is never, the task of the classroom teacher. It's always for a specialist. It's always for a pull-out program. It's always for somebody else. Just think about the mountains of staff we would have to hire if we're talking about every kid that's above grade level is now not kind of the problem is the wrong term, but is now not the job of the classroom teacher, it's the job of someone else. That's just a really big service population. And we're never going to be able to get, everybody kind of in that happy zone of proximal development if that's the model we use. And, I want to go back to something that Homero was talking about just because it's so relevant to this, and it's something that really should be called out, that he's really walked the walk, is we so often in gifted ed have these really narrow criteria. We have states that by law, you have to be in the top 2%, of the nation to be identified, top 3%. And it's really is kind of a strange thing, because even in cases where perhaps every single student in your school could benefit, like literally 100% of your kids could do it and benefit, you are not allowed to do that. So instead of kind of having, I kind of analogize this to your scarcity mindset references. Instead of doing that, our criteria for placement in any of these services, again, whether it's, calculus in 8th grade or whatever it is, should be which students have the prerequisite skills to benefit from it. So I usually say who's ready and would benefit from it. And if that's 100% of your students, what a wonderful problem to have. But so often the gifted field specifically, and I think you also see this in specialized high schools and things like that as well, or elite universities even, we have way more students that could actually do the thing than are actually allowed to be in the thing. Whether that thing is an Ivy League university or whether that thing is 8th grade algebra, we have this idea of, well, it's gifted, it's advanced, so we can only allow, this small percentage of students in. But, I think, maybe Homero's been the first person ever who said, what if we just let a whole bunch of kids try and do it? And then surprise, surprise, like the students do well. And so I think really one of the benefits maybe of getting rid of that gifted term is moving away from this really small percentage. Like when you hear gifted, you really think kind of just the 12-year-olds that are graduating college and things like that. But really who we're talking about is just kids that are under-challenged in their learning contexts. And that needs to be made much more the job of the entire educational system, and not just these specialists, that are the gifted specialists, because they're never going to be able to do it on their own. Right. It's just not enough of us.
And this is really part of this larger movement to try to individualize instruction and education, right? Personalize, which I think a lot of, we would love to see for every child, right? And it's a challenge, and you have to think about what are the strategies to do that. If we could afford a tutor for every single kid and they could spend all day with that, that'd be great. But that's not feasible. So then what? So let's get into the how we can actually make some of this happen. All right, let's see. Let me turn the page. Okay. Now, again, we're not going to have time to get to all 36 recommendations in detail, but let's hit some of the high notes here. And this first section is something I found fascinating. I didn't know anything about this before I engaged with this working group. And it's a super cool and important idea about front loading, or some people call it talent development. What happens before you even start to look for advanced learners in your schools? Sneha, can you tell us about this?
I absolutely will, because this is just one of my many passions, is this idea of accessible front loading. Like Michael said, people around are calling all sorts of things, whether it's called explorations, like I did 27 falls ago as a 3rd grade teacher, or whether it is nurturing or cultivating potential or talent development, whatever you're calling it. This idea that we have students that may not have had the opportunities at home or in their communities as others have. And so as a result, may not be easily seen, okay? Now, some districts and some schools are thinking, let's do talent development with all of our kids, especially when you're starting young, right? So this idea of access to higher level thinking and problem solving and communication at a really in-depth and rigorous way, in a creative way. Others say, okay, we want to focus more on certain marginalized groups, right? Okay, we're going to focus on these students. A lot of our Title I schools will use Title I funding for this idea. But this notion, whether it's at kindergarten and first grade, or even in ninth grade, when you do an AP summer camp, ahead of time, this notion that you're bringing students together to really look at this opportunity gap and filling some of those gaps, but really increasing these opportunities. So then we're creating environments where then we can see the potential in students. If you think of Yo-Yo Ma, right? And if somebody had never given Yo-Yo Ma a cello, we would never know the incredible talent that has been developed over time. But somebody had to have given him that cello first, right? And so how are we ensuring that we're creating environments to see that spark that may not have been lit in other areas due to their families maybe working 3 or 4 jobs, or they may not have had an entire library at their fingertips, like, I do in my house, right? Where, there's a happy room with centers in kindergarten. Every kid's not going to have that. And so how are we going to ensure that we are intentionally providing experiences to students, preferably all throughout, but especially in those younger years, or strategic interventions to help ensure this pipeline is as diverse as we need it to be?
That's right. And, we're about to talk about how we can identify students, right? And some of that is going to be through standardized tests is one of the biggest ways. And so the challenge is, of course, that some kids, especially coming from more disadvantaged backgrounds, are not going to show up and do well on those tests, even though if they've got a lot of innate talent, especially in say, the reading domain, because they may not have the vocabulary, the content knowledge, et cetera. So the group, we kept coming back to this phrase about, kids who are high achieving or have the potential for high achievement. And this is how we try to start to find those kids. All right, well, let's keep with you, Sneha, on the next one as well, which is about identification. And this really gets to the heart of, I think, what this group is all about.
Absolutely. And Homero already mentioned quite a few of these ideas, but in our recommendations, we really want to move away from a student having to show us how to be perfect in 10 different ways to get access to just content on their level, right? Sometimes it's, well, you have to have a 98 percentile on this test, a 95 on this test, and be really good behavior, and do this, and be perfect 10 times over. We don't want multiple hoops. We want multiple opportunities for students to show us their best, and for us then to recognize and identify them as needing advanced learning opportunities. So one of our major recommendations is universal screeners, because so often when we focus screening on only certain people, on only certain students, we are figuratively or actually having bias, right, through the glasses we wear. And so that idea of a universal screener really opens up that pipeline. The other idea of using data that already exists. We have so much data in our schools, and because schooling is local, using local norms. Now, if there is a nationwide, like the US Presidential Scholars, and they're comparing kids from all across the country to pick 200 or 300 of them, sure, you then need a national assessment, absolutely. But most schooling that we all talk about is local. So using these local norms to find out the students who are really achieving higher than their peers, higher. So in some districts, that higher may be in the 85th%, let's say, but if their average is 60, that kid's doing something different and needs something different. Just like in a school that may have higher performing, who is performing at that highest level. And so really making it about how do we capture student talent so we can respond to it, and not about just the tests, but opening up to multiple opportunities through universal screening, local norms, using the existing data, and giving students opportunities ongoing, right? Not just in third grade, but what about all of a sudden, if that student's gonna to their spark, we're going to see it in 8th grade or 9th grade or even 11th grade. How are we continuing to see this potential and then respond to it?
Yeah, I love it. And you covered that so well, Sneha. And so much built into here, right? I mean, the universal screening, it means, for one thing, getting away from this notion that somebody should have to have a teacher recommendation in order to get in, right? Because that is not universal, or a parent recommendation. A parent has to know that there's some form on the website they have to find, they have to fill it out, right? Now, I think the group, we had some debate about whether you could use those nominations in addition to these other screeners, right? If a teacher sees a kid that they think would be great for it, that, you know, some people talked about even self-nominations, which is a pretty cool idea, you know, especially as kids get older, say, hey, I can do that. You know, my friends are doing this over here and I'm just as smart as them. I could do this too. And to let that happen.
Michael, I once had a student come up to me and say, I know he always gets in trouble, Ms. Shah, but I think he needs to go to Ms. Rucker. Students can tell that there's something else there, right? So anyway,
that's right. And the local norms, so important, because what we're saying is that every single school in the country should have services for advanced learners, right? Absolutely. Or in the parlance of gifted and talented, you know, every elementary school should have a gifted and talented program. And yet that's not the case. We know there's a lot of schools that don't have them. They tend to be schools that are high poverty and where on average, a lot of the kids are lower achieving. But in those schools, there are still high achieving kids, or the kids with potential for high achievement. Again, they may not be at the tippity top of the national assessments, but they are significantly above where most of their peers are. And it's going to be very hard for a teacher to be able to serve those kids well, you know, without some special strategies, which we're going to get to next, right? And Scott's done some amazing studies on this where, you know, there's this enormous range in a given classroom. What is it, Scott? In a typical classroom, how many grade levels are represented?
Yeah, I mean, you know, of course, it depends on what you count as grade level and standards and the tests and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, my general armchair estimate is that the typical classroom probably has 4 to 6 grade levels of readiness. And that's kind of the middle part of the distribution. You do have these, I always say I want to find these classrooms. There are classrooms that have 2 grade levels present. You know, I don't know where they are, but they're out there somewhere. And there's also places that have, you know, essentially as many as we can measure. But really that kind of 4 to 6 is what I think of as the typical teacher load. So that's, you know, 5th grade classroom that's got kids reading at a 2nd grade level, doing math at a 2nd grade level, and then also all the way up to basically middle school proficiency in one classroom.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk then about the strategy. So we've identified students who could benefit from advanced learning services. What are some of those services that look like? Scott, give us again some of the high level ideas that are represented here.
Yeah, and I'm a really big fan of you know, services and interventions that are fairly non-controversial and also that are low cost. You know, kind of the low hanging fruit. And I've had a lot of district coordinators that have come to me over the years and said, you know, okay, I've got, you know, 1.5 FTE for my district of 3,000 kids. How do I use that, you know, most effectively? It's not going to be perfect. It's not enough. What do I do? And acceleration to me is always one of those places that could, a little bit of FTE, a little bit of effort and attention devoted to can really go a long way, because we are not setting up a separate classroom for a gifted kid. We're not doing a pullout program where the teacher has to rove around the building and find the students and then do a 30-minute enrichment class or something. All we're talking about doing is moving a student from where they are an outlier to a place where they are less of an outlier. Now, I say less of an outlier because if you take a kid, let's just say at the 98th percentile in 2nd grade, and you move that kid from the end of 2nd grade to the beginning of 4th grade, that kid is actually still going to be above the majority of the 4th graders. That's how advanced that kid is. So people often think like, oh, this student's going to struggle. They're going to be in a place where they're now, you know, a struggling learner. And these kids are so advanced that even accelerating them, they're still probably advanced. So what we're talking about with acceleration is if we've got those 4 to 6 grade levels of readiness, then those top kids academically, and we don't make the decisions purely based on academics, but academically, they are much more similar to higher grade level peers. So all we're saying is that perhaps humans within any given 12-month age band are diverse enough that just based on being born in that 12-month chunk of time isn't all we need to know which classroom you should be in. Some of those kids really are much more appropriate being with the fourth graders. Some of those kids are being appropriate with fifth graders. And we see this fairly consistently at the middle school level. There are kids that are taking Algebra 1 in 9th grade, is kind of the standard time. More in 8th grade, and there are also some that take it in 6th grade, because you know what? Humans vary. Some kids are ready for it sooner rather than later. I see this in my own kids all the time. I mean, think about anything else you've ever learned to do, whether it's, go bowling or sewing or something. Some things take people more time. So really being much more flexible. And the way I describe it is, just think of it as like blurring the lines between grade levels a little bit. We're not burning down the system. We're not getting rid of grade levels altogether, but just making it so that there isn't a 9-step process that takes the entire school year in order for a student in 4th grade to maybe just go to the 5th grade math class, because that's a more appropriate placement. So trying to break down some of those barriers, again, not for everyone, but so that those students who are ready for it have much more of an easy access to it. Again, that idea of proactivity, not waiting for a parent nomination or for a kid to get bored, but proactively, and this is something Homero can speak to better than I can, searching out kids who could do the thing instead of waiting for like a parent to demand it, I think is really what we're talking about.
Excellent. All right. That is really well said. And I've moved the slide ahead to now some of the additional ones. But again, it's still the same idea of acceleration, right? In elementary schools, we're often talking about, as you say, having the student who's advanced in math go join the older kids for math class, and that's fine. Once we get to middle school and high school, in most places, we're into 6 or 7 or 8 courses a day. Becomes perhaps a little bit easier then to do that kind of moving up and down. And we're saying, hey, we need a lot of those honors and advanced courses. In the wake of the terrible awfulness of what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, we saw some places that said, oh, because of equity, we think we should get rid of honors classes. We should get rid of advanced classes. That's not what this working group believes. And there's, many of us that care deeply about equity. It's not that we should end these things. We should mend them. We should extend them. We should make sure they're more accessible to more kids who could do it, including from marginalized backgrounds. We need more of it, not less of it. And once you get into middle school and high school, as Homero says, dual enrollment becomes a great opportunity as well. Another way of acceleration all the way into higher ed. Okay, now achievement grouping. You said you'd like to avoid controversial topics, Scott. Well, this controversial topic has found you. Tell us about this.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I don't actually I think it's kind of triggering controversial. People see the term, they immediately think any kind of grouping is kind of like European style tracking. You're taking a test in 3rd grade and then we're deciding what career you're going to be in 20 years later or something. But I think when you actually go and look at teachers describing their common practices, we just had at NWEA just had kind of a paper come out that talked about the schools that tend to get the most growth out of their students. And a lot of what comes up is this idea of flexible, short-term, being able to pivot on the fly grouping. So teachers get any kind of data, and those data include standing at the front of the classroom and realizing your students are falling asleep. That's a very informative piece of data that should guide your instructional practice, all the way up to standardized tests. But we're using every bit of data that we have on hand to pivot and make instructional decisions. And that's from short-term interactions with a single student, all the way up to using data to do acceleration, the whole gamut. And so clustering is really just bringing groups of students together who have similar instructional needs right here and right now. It's different than tracking and kind of more permanent things in that we're not making prescriptive long-term decisions. We're making short-term decisions for what do you need right now, and that might be different in math than reading. It might be different in 3rd grade than in 5th grade. It's going to vary quite a bit, but that's the whole point, is that there is that flexibility in it. And so I think there's a lot of controversy in it when kind of at the policy level, and we start being really kind of pontificating about what grouping actually means. But it's amazing how much, if you read or talk to teachers about what their instruction looks like, or you sit in a classroom and watch them do things, they use grouping all the time. And it's much less controversial in like the classroom that I think it comes up in my world, at least. Certainly has a of controversy.
Excellent. Okay, good. Hey, by the way, I should say I am definitely watching the Q&As and great questions and comments, and appreciate Sneha and Scott and others answering them as we go too. So that's great. We will try to get some of the other comments in here as we get towards the end. Okay, now selective enrollment schools. This is kind of a special type of achievement grouping, so to speak. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, since turns out these schools, these are the Stuyvesants of the world, or the Lowells, or the Thomas Jeffersons, get a lot of attention in the media, and yet it is a minuscule number of kids in America that go to one of these high schools. But we basically again say we should not end them, but mend them, extend them. We need more of these things. There's too much scarcity where they do exist. So you can dig into the report for more on that. Homero, let's go back to you on this question of social emotional learning and mental health supports. This is a big issue in education today for all kids. And we talked some about how this is a big issue for the kids we are talking about today as well. And especially when people say, oh, if you let kids skip to a higher grade level, that's going to be challenging for them socially, or, you're sending middle schoolers to college campuses. Isn't that hard on them? Tell us a little bit about this from your experience, if you could.
I haven't seen that as a negative impact on the kids, as far as the kids want to be there. We don't force kids to be in those upper level courses. We just had a sixth grader finish pre-calc at the community college. And then we had our first 14-year-old kid finishing up her Associate of Arts degree at our community college as well. She will be attending next year to one of our state universities. And these are kids that have gone through our program. And really, I don't see any, if the parents decide not to put him in, we'll force parents to force kids to be in our program. The kids are free to come and go. That's how we do our program. We have currently a pre-calc class that we just finished. 38 kids finished a pre-calc class. That was made up of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. We have currently about 500 kids in our program. Out of those, 150 kids registered for Arizona Western College courses, particularly in algebra. We incorporated English 100 and English 101 at the community level. And we're noticing that the kids are being successful. Let's say, for example, a kid takes beginning algebra and decides not to take intermediate. That's fine with us. Like Scott was saying, we're not, we're laying the foundation, but we're not forcing anybody to take any course that beyond what they think that they can do. But it's something that we are actually, we are availing the kids the opportunity to advance, and that's what is the most important thing for emotional and social. I don't think that we have had any issues with that. We have meetings with the parents, and we tell the parents this is what is expected. Your kid's going to be a college kid, and they are expected to go on Saturdays to a group, to a math lab on Saturdays, and that we expect for them to complete their homework assignments and stuff like that. If they feel that they're pressured, they can always opt out. But the good thing is that if we don't allow these kids to have an opportunity to be in these courses, they will never know if they're able to do it or not. So,
that's right. And why not let them try, right? What's the worst that can happen? Yeah.
Well, and both of you are, I can't help myself here, because both of you are really talking about erring on the side of inclusion, erring on the side. So anytime we make a placement decision, we could accidentally place a kid who's not ready, or we could accidentally hold a kid back who is ready. Either way, we've made a mistake. Those are false positives, those are false negatives. We've made a mistake, which is always going to happen. But what Homero is talking about is erring on the side of false positives. This idea of, you know what, we don't necessarily know with 100% confidence that the kid is going to be successful, but A, we're going to give him or her a shot. We're going to err on the side of inclusion. And B, we have provisions in place for when it doesn't go well. We make clear to them how you go back if it really is that bad. We provide supports. And this is something that I think gifted ed and kind of schools in general have a problem with. We err on the side of we're totally fine missing 50, 60 kids who maybe would benefit as long as one kid isn't placed on accident. Like we're terrified of accidentally placing kid, whatever that means, accidentally. Putting a kid in who might struggle or might fail, but we're totally okay if we leave a whole bunch of, say, 8th graders in pre-algebra, even though they really are ready for algebra. And that just drives me absolutely batty. And it's something
Scott,
I love about Homero's practice.
I'm sorry, but Scott, that's why there's some of this movement towards automatic placement, right? But that's one of the biggest opposing arguments is what happens if a kid gets in there and well, as educators, we're going to give wraparound services. We're going to, be there to scaffold support. And why not? Right. And so, Scott, I love that, erring on a false positives we must do.
Right. And kids are not snowflakes, right? They are not snowflakes. All right. Well, finally,
if I can add, this year we sent 40 kids to the Barrett's Honor Scholars Program at Arizona State, which is a prestigious program. And the kids spent 1 week by themselves, and they were introduced to engineering, sustainability, and they had a blast. They had and all these kids are kids that were identified as high achievers. They are not were identified as gifted or anything like that. And they did extremely well. The Barrett Scholars are now being really open into allowing kids that fall on the 85, 90th percentile, and it's fine with them because they're noticing a change in their programs. They're noticing that the more kids that they include, the better outcome they're going to have, and the more kids are going to end up coming out of that pipeline that we're talking about. The other thing, this Sunday, we're gonna drive 3 vans to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles for the citywide program, and the 20 kids that we're going to take are 5th and 6th graders.
Wow.
That have never traveled to LA, that have never been to campuses. They're going to spend 3 weeks at that residential program. So we got to take chances. We need to. We have to err on the side of that we're going to do well and everything's going to be okay. We cannot be, walking with fear, because the moment we fear, the kids will sense, the families will sense that we have that fear, and then they're going to hold back and not allow these kids to go. So it's extremely important.
So the last few ones here get to such a critical issue, which is around teachers. We know that so few teachers end up doing any kind of training around advanced learning when they're going through their teacher preparation programs. And so, as we say here, then we've got to provide it to them once they're in the schools. If we can't change the teacher prep programs, though we should try to do that as well. Right. And that instructional materials, there's been a real renaissance around the idea of how important curriculum is, and that we shouldn't expect teachers, any teacher, to try to develop a curriculum on their own. There's finally some good high quality materials out there for the general education classroom aligned to standards. And we need to make sure that those are supplemented by things that are targeted to advanced learners as well. So for any of you, any thoughts, what in particular people should be thinking about when it comes to supporting teachers? We're asking them to do a lot, as always, and we shouldn't ask them to do that without support, right?
Why don't we let Homero go first, because he's the closest with daily teachers, and then we can, the rest, Scott and I can chime in.
when you don't have the teachers in your district to be able to challenge the advanced learners, you go out. You know, we have Arizona Western College, and we go out and we encourage the kids to go out there and take advantage of the classes that are being taught at that college level. But we do, in our campus, we do have the early college program currently has 6 very qualified teachers. And I cannot stress that more, you know, because they know the content. And these are the teachers that will, you know, eventually, you know, take these kids to the next level. We have 6 teachers, 5 of them are former engineers. So they've been teaching for a while and they know the content. And we have one from Raul Rojas that came back, a former student from MIT. He's teaching for us. He's now right now working at CTY as a dean of residence for them at Roger Williams University. The reason I bring these, you know, this up about the teachers is that we really need, you know, teachers that are qualified to be able to teach and take these kids to another level. That's what we do here at Gadsden, and we've been very fortunate. I know other communities don't have, you know, the teachers, but we need to push for other communities and other school districts to train, you know, the teachers and to prepare the teachers, especially in content, because that's what the kids need. You know, they need to have the content all, you know, ready and so that they can go to the next level and continuously, you know, get algebra classes and eventually go to college and all that.
Great. Yeah, and there's a question in here about teacher shortages, which no doubt is making things challenging in some places where those shortages are especially tough. But I love that solution that says if you can't get the teachers into your traditional public schools, then, you know, colleges, dual enrollment, it's a great resource and kids can do the work.
And Michael, I'll also just add some other practical ideas is thinking, you know, one of the COVID keeps that we have realized is that effective online instruction can really support some of these students, right? So, you know, whether you have a virtual school or a district can do something where they bring together 5 kids from different, right, schools to do that, can help leverage some of the scarcity issues. But to answer one of the other questions in the chat, if you don't mind, Michael, about teachers and professional development, so much of it, though, really has to be sustained learning about changing our mindsets and how we view, right? Because we have to move away from the mindset of scarcity, but also of how we see students at risk versus at potential. And that is so important. And while we get the content experts in, like Homero is saying, absolutely, we as schools also need to really focus on shifting this mindset. So we're not just thinking it's this type of child who's that perfect little child sitting in, you know, in a row and doing this is the only one that's able to learn versus some of the non-teacher pleasing behaviors that stand in our way, but actually maybe needing the most intervention.
So folks, let's get you know, some of the issues that have come up in the Q&A, and again, y'all have been doing a great job answering them by text. But there's been a couple of groups of kids that have come up that people have been asking about. One is the twice exceptional students out there, and whether this report is speaking enough to their needs. Anybody want to address that? Scott or Sneha, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Scott can add. You know, our twice exceptional students are definitely a marginalized group, right? When we think of this area of work, there are lots of different states that have worked on that. We're also working on that as well. But you again have to have that mindset, right, of partnering across the school, like Scott was talking about. You have to have that mindset. So you're working with the EC teachers, that you're working with regular, you're working with your ELs, et cetera. EL teachers, English learner teachers, to really ensure that we are catching students, right? And ensuring we're creating that support. Because with our twice exceptional, they are some of our most diverse students. And so how do we ensure they're being challenged, but yet also supported with the needs that they have that need to be mitigated? Where gifted education kind of stands different, or education, advanced education, is that we want that to increase, right? Ideally, we'd love some of our special education needs to decrease, right, and mitigate, right? And so you're having to really balance that, but working together in that open way and that communication. But you're absolutely right. Our twice exceptional students, we cannot forget.
Yeah,